we can see an example of the terminal end event, indicating that the process has completely finished when arriving at this end. In this case, the process ends when a cancellation of the process occurs. It is important to bear in mind that if the terminal end event is being used within a sub-process, that it only indicates the end of the sub-process, not the parent process or the process that is invoking it. In this process, we can see an example using the message end event, indicating that a message is sent to another participant when the process is finished. In this case, a rejected message is sent when the candidate was not accepted, and an accepted message sent when its process was successful. Now we are going to see the intermediate events. If you remember, intermediate events indicate something that occurs or may occur during the course of the process, between start and end. They affect the process flow, but do not initiate nor end it directly. Intermediate events can be used within the sequence flow or on the borders of an activity. When the intermediate event is used within the normal flow of the process, one of two things will happen. If the event is used to catch, the event can respond to the event trigger. It means that the process flow has to wait until the trigger occurs. If the event is used to set off or throw the event trigger when the token arrives at the event, then the trigger of the event will immediately occur, and the token will move down the outgoing sequence flow. When the intermediate event is attached to the boundary of an activity, it always means abort the activity if the trigger occurs. It is exception handling and can only be used to catch the event trigger. When the token arrives at the activity, one of two things will happen. The token will move down the outgoing normal flow if the activity is finished before the event trigger happens. The token will follow the outgoing exception flow if the event trigger occurs before the activity is finished and the activity is aborted. Because when the token arrives at the activity, the event is waiting for something to occur until the trigger occurs or the activity is completed or finished. We also have various types of intermediate events, and the icon placed in the center of the shape indicates the type of behavior of the event. The types of intermediate event are none, message, timer, error, cancel, compensation, conditional, link, signal, and multiple. As we have seen previously, intermediate events can be used to catch or to throw the event trigger. When the event is used to catch, the event marker will be unfilled, and when the event is used to throw, the event marker will be filled. The none intermediate event indicates that something occurs or can occur within the process. It can also be used to represent something that does not depend directly on the users of the process, as, for example, a reception activity and physical verification of documents, whereby the user cannot perform this if the documents are not received. Additionally, these events, according to BPMN, can be used to represent the different states in which the process passes. These events can only be used within the sequential flow of the process. The message intermediate event indicates that a message can be sent or received. a message arrives from another process, or a message sends to another process. If the message is sent by the process, then the icon on the inside of the shape is shown filled. If the message intermediate event is of reception, it indicates that the process has to wait until the message has been received and the icon on the inside of the event is empty. This type of event can be used within the sequential flow of the process or attached to the boundary of an activity to indicate an exception flow. When used attached to the boundary of an activity, the event is always of reception, catch. When the message intermediate event is placed within the normal flow of the process, if the message intermediate event is used to catch, it indicates that the process cannot continue until the message has been received. If the event is used to throw the message, when the token arrives at the event, then the message is sent and the process continues. When the message intermediate event is attached to the boundary of an activity is used for exception handling, this means when the message is received during the activity, abort the activity, and then follow the exception flow. These mean that normal flow and exception flow are exclusive alternatives. The timer intermediate event indicates a waiting time within the process. This type of event can be used within the sequential flow of the process, indicating a waiting time between the activities of the process, or joined to the borders of an activity to indicate an exception flow when a timeout occurs. When the timer intermediate event is placed within the normal flow of the process, indicates a waiting time, it means the timer intermediate event acts as a delay mechanism. This process waits for a specific date or specific time, or waits for a specific duration to be able to continue. When the timer intermediate event is attached to the boundary of an activity, indicates an activity timeout pattern. When the token arrives at the activity, the timer starts, and one of two things will happen. If the activity has finished before the timeout, a specific duration or specific date or time, then the token follows the normal flow. If the activity has not completed within a specific duration or specific date or time, then the activity is aborted and it takes the exception flow. Cancellation intermediate event. This type of intermediate event is used for a transaction subprocess. The cancellation intermediate event is always diagrammed on the borders of the transactional subprocess and indicates an alternative flow that can be made when the transaction subprocess is cancelled. Error intermediate event. This type of event is used to capture errors and to handle them. It allows you to diagram an exception flow from the event. For this reason, this event can only be attached to the boundary of an activity. The conditional intermediate event is used when the flow needs to wait for a business condition to be fulfilled. It can be used within the sequential flow of the process, indicating that it should wait until a business condition has been fulfilled, or when joined to the borders of an activity, indicating an exception flow that is activated when the condition is met. The signal intermediate event is a type of event used to send or receive signals. If it is diagrammed within the sequential flow of a process, it can send or receive signals. If it is diagrammed on the limits of an activity, it can only receive signals. In the diagram, we can see the milestone pattern, where an activity of a process is activated only when certain objectives are reached. In this case, when the signal is received that is sent from within the subprocess. If we look at the example, the activity C cannot be initiated until activity X is performed.